Welcome back to Outside Views, and I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas. But now we need to get back to business. And today we need to ask a question that is becoming the loudest whisper in Westminster. How much longer will Keir Starmer remain in office? And my personal view is that we are witnessing a slow-motion political car crash, and the man at the steering wheel seems to have no idea where the brakes are. It's absolutely staggering to see a prime minister who won a historic landslide just over a year ago, now languishing at historic lows in the polls with a net approval rating that has plummeted to minus 57. To put that in perspective, that is the same toxic territory inhabited by the Conservatives just before they were annihilated, and it mirrors the popularity of Boris Johnson on the day he was forced to resign. And I find it deeply frustrating that the British public, having finally escaped the chaos of the Tory years, has been handed a government that seems to have inherited all the dysfunction and none of the charisma. The Starmer brand, which was supposed to be about competence and service, now looks to be irrecoverable because the public has simply stopped giving him the benefit of the doubt. And the reality on the ground in December 2025 is grim. The economic growth that was promised has flatlined, with the latest figures showing a pathetic 0.1% growth in the third quarter. And while the government desperately points to a tiny boost in business confidence, the people in the street are still being crushed by the high cost of living and the fallout from a budget that many feel was a mini-budget style disaster, also in slow motion. But the most damning indictment of Starmer's leadership is the meteoric rise of Nigel Farage and Reform UK. It's a terrifying thought, but Reform has led national polls since April, with some surveys placing them as high as 36%, while Labour has collapsed to just 21%. If an election were held today, Farage wouldn't just be a nuisance, he would potentially walk into number 10 with an outright majority, a scenario that would have seemed like a fever dream just 2 years ago. The discontent within the Labour Party is now so thick you could cut it with a knife, and Starmer is facing a toxic culture accusation within his own government, and his MPs are terrified. They look at the upcoming local elections in May 2026 and see a slaughterhouse. With millions of voters potentially having their elections postponed or cancelled due to reorganization, a move Farage has brilliantly branded as the behavior of a banana republic, the government looks desperate and undemocratic. And my view is that if Labour takes the predicted shellacking in May, the murmurs of a coup will turn into a full-blown leadership challenge. Bookmakers are already giving Starmer a 60% probability of losing his job next year, and you can see the panic in the markets where hedging against the pound is becoming more expensive as political risk rises. But who is waiting in the wings to wield the knife? Well, the most obvious candidate is the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, who is clearly on maneuvers. His allies are already briefing against Starmer, calling the government a maintenance team rather than a force for change, though Streeting himself continues to issue those unconvincing categorical denials. And then you have Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester, who is playing the king over the water role, and he's playing that perfectly. Polling shows that in a head-to-head contest, Burnham would crush Starmer among party members, winning 58 to 32%. And the only thing stopping Burnham is the lack of a seat in the House of Commons. But in the febrile atmosphere of 2026, don't be surprised if some safe Labour seat suddenly becomes vacant to kind of facilitate his return. And let's not forget Angela Rayner, who despite her own scandals remains a darling of the party faithful and a constant reminder to Starmer that his moderate grip on the party is slipping. And Starmer's defenders, like Chancellor Rachel Reeves, insist that 2026 will be the year renewal turns into reality. They point to falling inflation and interest rate cuts as the green shoots of recovery. And they hope that a closer relationship with the EU, including rejoining the Erasmus scheme, will keep the pro-European wing of the party quiet. But in my view, these are tiny crumbs thrown at a starving electorate. The fundamental issue is that Starmer has spent his first 18 months trying to manage Brexit rather than fix the unbelievably, as some would say, stupid mistake that it was. He's being outflanked on the right by Farage on immigration and on the left by a potential Your Party, that one led by Jeremy Corbyn and Sarah Sultana. And Starmer is trapped in a shrinking middle ground, and his refusal to be bold on the European question is leaving a vacuum that his rivals are more than happy to fill. So, what's the most likely scenario? I believe Starmer is 2 or 3 major crises away from an intolerable resignation. If the local elections in May are the disaster everyone expects, the men in grey suits, or perhaps the kingmakers like Ed Miliband or the trade union leaders, will decide that the anti-Midas touch is terminal. And there is a high probability that Labour will change leaders in 2026 to avoid a total wipeout in the next general election. While some argue that there is no standout alternative, the history of the Tory party shows that once a leader becomes a liability, the party will find a replacement, even if it's a gamble. Starmer might talk about 2026 being the year of turning things around, but for him, it's much more likely to be the year he's turned out of office. And the outside view is that the clock isn't just ticking for Keir Starmer, it's practically striking midnight.